Welcome everyone to lesson 1 of module 1 in the My Farm mm, project training course. My name is Silvia Locatelli and I will be your guide through this lesson. I'm a researcher and project manager in agri-food sector, and my background is in crop science, where I completed my PhD studying innovative and sustainable cultivation systems. Over the past years, I work on several European research projects that connect agriculture, sustainability, and education. And I'm very excited to explore this topic with you today. So, in this first lesson, we will talk about multifunctionality in agriculture. So, today, farming is not just about producing crops or raising livestock. Agriculture feeds us, yes, but it also maintains landscapes, preserve biodiversity, supports rural life, and protects our environment. So, understanding this broader perspective is essential if we want to build food systems that are sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. So, before dive in, let's look at what you will learn in this unit. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to define what multifunctionality in agriculture means and explain how the concept has evolved in Europe and around the world. You will be able to identify the different functions of agriculture in economic, environmental, and social, and understand how they interact. Then you will be able to compare two main models. The productivistic model focus on yield and efficiency, and the multifunctional model, which includes goals such as sustainability, biodiversity, and cultural value. You will be able also to recognize how European Union promotes multifunctionality through through policies, especially common agricultural policy or CAP, and also evaluate real examples of multifunctional farms and reflect on how their strategies can inspire new approaches in different contexts. So these five objectives will guide our learning and show what you will be able to do and understand by the end of this module. Now, before we continue, let's take a short moment to think. Think about this. When you imagine a farm, what comes first to your mind? Is it a field of golden wheat, dairy cows grazing on green hills, or perhaps something more subtle? Clean water, rural communities, or beautiful open landscapes. So, if you thought about all of them, you will already thinking like a multifunctional farmer, because agriculture today is much more than production. It's about connections between nature, people, between economy and ecology, and between also tradition and innovation. So now that we have introduced this idea, let's look at what multifunctionality actually means in practice. So the word itself already gives us a clue. So multi means many, and functionality refers to roles or purpose. So multifunctionality tells us that farming is not limited to producing food, feed, or fiber, like wheat, milk, or cotton. Agriculture also provides a wide range of other benefits to society. These benefits might not have a price tag, but they are deeply valued. So think about it. A vineyard in Italy doesn't just make wine, it also shapes the beauty of the landscape and attracts tourism. Another example, a family farm in Ireland doesn't just raise sheep, it preserves local breeds and maintains ancient pastures. All of these are example of many functions that agriculture performs beyond its economic role. These functions include environmental care, such as protecting soil and water, biodiversity conservation from pollinators to native species, rural employment, helping to keep villages alive, and cultural heritage, maintaining traditions, knowledge, and local food products. We also talk about ecosystem services, benefit that nature provides thanks to well-managed farming. These include clean water, fertile soils, pollinator, and even climate regulation. So, when agriculture works in harmony with the environment, it helps society as a whole. Because of all these interconnected roles, agriculture is now recognized as a multidimensional sector, contributed to economic, environmental, and social goals all at once. And this is exactly what multifunctionality is about. Let's see now how experts and policymakers interpret these concepts. There are two main approaches, as you can see, the descriptive or positive approach and the normative approach. This descriptive approach says that multifunctionality simply exists. It's part of the natural character of farming. So, in other words, every farm, whether big or small, already produce multiple outcomes. Some are private goods like milk or fruit, which are sold on the market. Others are public goods like clean air, open landscapes, or the vitals of rural communities. Things everyone can enjoy, but that are not bought or sold. Then we have the normative approach. On the other hand, uh, that goes a step further. It says multifunctionality should be seen as a goal, something to encourage and promote through policy and planning. So here, multifunctionality becomes as a guiding idea for governments, helping them designing laws, rural development programs, and um, subsidies that reward sustainable practices. So think of think of it this way. The descriptive approach tell us that farming already what farming already does, and the normative approach tell us what farming should aim to do. So both perspectives are essential. One helps us recognize the hidden value of agriculture, and the other helps to act and to make that value stronger and more visible. Now let's take a look at how the idea of multifunctionality in agriculture developed over time. The concept began to take shape in 1980s, a period when many European countries were starting to question the long-term effects of intensive and productivistic farming systems. So, after decades of post-war expansion, agriculture had achieved remarkable productivity. But it also created new problems like declining biodiversity, water and soil pollution, rural depopulation, and increasing pressure of natural resources. So, experts and policymakers realized that focusing only on production was not enough. Farming should also contribute to environmental protection, social well being, and the viability of rural areas. So, a crucial step came in 1988 when the European Commission published its landmark report, The Future of Rural Society. This one, this was one of the first official documents to explicitly state that agriculture performs three essential roles: the economic, environmental, and social. Economic by producing food and providing employment, environmental environmental role by managing land and protecting natural resources, and social by maintaining rural communities and cultural traditions. So these recognitions marked a real turning point to European thinking. It was the beginning of the shift from a purely productive view to a more multifunctional one. Then, in the early 1990s, this idea gained global attention. At the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, the world leaders adopted Agenda 21, a comprehensive plan for sustainable development. So, in chapter 14 of this document, focus on sustainable agriculture and rural development. It clearly states that agriculture should not only produce food, but also manage rural resources responsibly, protect biodiversity, and improve the quality of rural life. Then, a few years later, in 1996, the Food of Agriculture Organization, FAO, organized the World Food Summit in Rome, and its declaration of world food security reaffirmed that agriculture must meet economic, social, and environmental goals simultaneously. This was one of the earliest global acknowledgments of agriculture's multifunctional character. However, even through these political declarations, that were important, they remained quite general and difficult to apply in concrete policy measures. This is where the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development played a decisive role. In 1998, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a minister meeting on agriculture member, officially recognized the multifunctional role of agriculture. They agreed that agriculture produces not only food and fiber, but also non-commodity outputs, such as landscape maintenance, rural employment, and environmental services. To support this vision, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development published two key analytical reports: Multifunctionality toward an analytical framework and Multifunctionality, the policy implications in 2001 and 2003. These documents provided the first conceptual and methodological framework to measure and support multifunctionality. They also helped governments distinguish between legitimate policy goals like rewarding environmental benefits and trade distorting subsidies, a central issue in global agricultural trade debates. So, multifunctionality originally emerged as a reaction to the negative effects of past agricultural models. But over time, it develops into a positive vision of for the future, and that connects production, environmental, and society. So today, multifunctionality is not just a theory or a political slogan. It forms part of rural development strategies, environmental planning, and food security policies at both European and global levels. Let's now explore how the idea of multifunctionality became an official part of European agricultural policy. A decisive turning point came with the Agenda 2000 reform adopted by the European Commission in March 1999 and implemented from 2000 onwards. The reform represented a major step in redefining the common agricultural policy, the set of rules that governs farming and rural support across all EU member states. So, in the decades following the World War II, the common agricultural policy was largely oriented toward increasing productivity and food security. However, by the 1980s and the early 1990s, the policy had created unintended consequences. Overproduction and costly surpluses, environmental degradation due to intensive land use and chemical inputs, and rural depopulation and declining farm employment in many regions. It's become clear that the common agricultural policy needed to evolve from a purely productivist, productivistic model toward a more multifunctional and sustainable vision of agriculture. The European Commission Agenda 2000 communication explicitly started that agriculture is not only a producer of foodstuffs, but also a custodian of the countryside and a key element of the rural economy. So, this sentence marked that the formal recognition of multifunctionality at the EU level. So, under Agenda 2000, the Common Agricultural Policy was reconstructed into two pillars. Pillar 1, market and income support, so direct payments and price mechanism. And Pillar 2, rural development policy, which introduced targets measures for environmental protection, diversification, and rural innovation. So, this two pillar model reflected a broader understanding of what agriculture should do. So, be multifunctional, so addressing economic, environmental, and social dimensions. Be sustainable and competitive, ensuring viability without harming ecosystems. Support rural areas, strengthening small farmers and regional development, and respond to consumer expectation. So, including food quality, animal welfare, and environmental concerns. So, for the first time, multifunctionality became a mm, core principle guiding agriculture and rural development policies across the European Union. But while the principle was shared, its implementation varied widely between member states. In France and Italy, emphasizes diversification, support agritourism, local processing, and short food supply chains. In Germany and the Netherlands, focus on environmental management and landscape care, including agri-environmental schemes to maintain biodiversity. As you can see in Eastern Europe countries which joined the EU later, adopted multifunctionality as a strategy to stimulate rural employment and revitalize underdeveloped areas. And in Spain, tended to apply it more selective, maintaining targeting marginal or less favored rural areas. So this diversity shows that multifunctionality is not a uniform policy model. It's maintaining and application depending strongly on cultural context, geographical conditions, and national priorities. Let's now see the multifunctionality and the global trade. In 1990s, multifunctionality in agriculture evolved from a policy concept into a key issue in global trade negotiations. Its inclusion in international debates revealed deep differences between exporting and importing countries over the role of agriculture in society. So, during that decade, international agricultural trade was undergoing a major transformation. The World Trade Organization, WTO, established in 1995, replaced the old GETT system and launched a new agenda aimed at reducing agricultural subsidies and opening markets. So the goal was to make global trade fairer and less distorted by government intervention. However, many governments argued that agriculture is not just another economic sector. So, unlike industry, farming provides essential non market goods, as I said before, rural employment, landscape management, biodiversity protection, and food security. So, this difference became the core of one of the most significant disputes in agricultural policy at the global level. So the discussion became particularly heated during the OECD ministerial meeting in agriculture in 1998 and the WTO agricultural negotiation in 1999 and 2001, which led up to the Doha round. So the main coalitions of countries took opposite position. In one part, there were the Cairns Group, composed of major agricultural exporters such as Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Argentina, Brazil, and United States. They maintained that multifunctionality is being used as an excuse to preserve trade distorting subsidies. So they argued that that many domestic support measures, especially in the European Union, Japan, and Norway, were formed to protectionism that unfairly limited market access for competitive exporters. The other part was the multifunctionality group, led by European Union, Japan, Korea, Norway, and New Zealand. And sorry, Switzerland. They defended a different position. They claimed that farming performs multiple public good, functions, from maintaining cultural landscapes to ensuring food security, and therefore deserve specific policy instruments. So, in their view, agricultural subsidies could be justified when they protect public goods that markets fail to value. So, this opposition reflected two distinct philosophies: the liberalization approach, seeing agriculture primarily as a business activity subject to free market rules, and the multifunctional approach, treating agriculture as a sector with unique economic, social, and environmental responsibility. So, to clarify the controversy, the OECD launched a series of analytical studies between 1998 and 2003. So, their goal was to distinguish legitimate multifunctional objectives such as environmental protection or rural availability from this discussed protectionism that simply maintaining income transfers to farmers. So the two key publication emerging from this work, there was the multifunctionality towards analytical framework and multifunctionality, the policy implications. So these reports introduce the idea that policy measures should be assessed according to their specific non-trade concerns. For example, whether they target environmental benefits or distort markets. So this analytical framework later influenced the WTO, sorry, agreement on agriculture, especially the classification of domestic support into green box, blue box, and amber box categories. Despite these efforts, there is still no global consensus on how multifunctionality should be treated in international trade law. Export oriented countries continue to argue for further liberalization, while others emphasize the need to safeguard the social and ecological rules of farming. So the question remains: should agriculture be governed purely by market rules, or should it be recognized as a sector with special public responsibilities? So the debate began in the 1990s continue today, showing that the balance between economic efficiency and societal value in agriculture is still being defined. So we have just seen how multifunctionality has been discussed in politics and trade and global trade. But policy is not the only area where this idea developed. Over the last 3 decades, scientists and researchers have also been deeply engaged with the concept, try to understand what it really means, how to measure it, and how it can guide the future of agriculture. So, in the 1990s, the first analytical studies came mainly from agricultural economists, often working with the OECD, and their central question were: if agriculture generates public goods, such as biodiversity, rural landscapes, and water protection, how can we quantify those benefits? And the second question was how can governments design policies that reward farmers for providing them? These discussions led to the development of indicators and evaluation frameworks for multifunctionality, such as those later used in agricultural environmental schemes and rural development programs in Europe. Soon, other academic disciplines joined the conversation, giving rise to a truly interdisciplinary field of study. Sociologists and rural studies scholars examined how multifunctionality contributes to the social sustainability of farming, for example, by supporting smallholder livelihoods, maintaining rural identity, and promoting farm diversification through agritourism or local artisan production. The agronomists and ecologists analyze how diverse farming systems can enhance ecosystem functions and maintain on farm biodiversity. Others, like environmental scientists, explore the contribution of agriculture to carbon storage, soil protection, and water purification. And others, like geographers and landscape researchers, focus on how agricultural land use shapes regional identities and territorial cohesion and cultural landscapes across Europe and not only across Europe, of course. However, researchers have not always agreed on how to define or apply the concept. In the academic literature, there are two main perspectives. Um, the supporters seeing multifunctionality as a powerful framework to address complex rural challenges from farm income diversification to environmental restoration and social inclusion. They view it as a practical toolbox for integrating sustainability into farming systems. And the other part, the other perspective, is critics that they describe as a too vague or politically convenient. Scholars such as Allar in 1998 and Losch in 2004 call it a catch-all term or magic word, warning that governments could use it theoretically to justify traditional subsidies or avoid deeper reforms. So these debates has made multifunctionality one of the most contested yet influential concepts in agricultural research. It bridges science, policy, and practice, but it also raises an important question. How can we ensure that multifunctionality truly contributes to the goals of sustainable development, such as reducing poverty, protecting ecosystems, and ensuring global food security, rather than becoming just another political slogan? So this question continues to guide both research and policy today. So we have now reached the end of this first lesson on multifunctionality in agriculture. So before we close, let's briefly review what we cover and reflect on how this concept connects farming policy and society. We started by defining multifunctionality. the idea that agriculture does much more than produce food and fiber. It also supports economic development, protects the environment, and contributes to social well being, so generating both private and public benefits. Then we looked at how the concept developed over time. So the early concerns in the 1980s about the impacts of intensive farming. Then the in 1988 European Commission report The Future of Rural Society, which highlighted agriculture's economic, environmental, and social rules. Then the global recognition that came with the 1992 in Rio Earth Summit, and in 1996 the FAO World Food Summit, and finally the OECD analytical framework in 1998 and 2003, which provided a clear structure to understand multifunctionality in policy debates. Then we moved and we saw how multifunctionality entered European policy through Agenda 2000, which reshaped the common agricultural policy around sustainability and rural development. At the global level, we discussed the WTO debates where countries disagreed on whether multifunctionality could justify continued support to farmers or whether it risked becoming a form of protectionism. Finally, we saw how researchers approached the concept with economists, sociologists, agronomists, and environmental scientists, sometimes agreeing, and sometimes challenging its definition and implications. So today, multifunctionality is much more than a theory or a political phrase. It is a guiding framework for the sustainable transition of agriculture. It reminds us that farming just balance production must balance, production with environmental care, rural viability, and social fairness. So, in the context of the European Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, and also the sustainable development goals, multifunctionality helps shape a more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable future for agriculture. So, thank you for this lesson. See you all in the next lesson.